Imagine this. You live in one of the safest, greenest, most peaceful countries on Earth, and yet you're desperate to leave.
In the year to August, 134,000 people departed Aotearoa. That's the highest ever recorded for an annual period, and a 37% increase on the year before.
Between January and June 2024, 88,000 citizens left, around 1.5% of the country gone. Not for a gap year, for good. Flights out aren't tourists, they're nurses, teachers, engineers. Paradise, priced like a luxury export. How did everyday life in a rich, peaceful nation become this hard? This is the story of how New Zealand, once hailed as a model of resilience and innovation, became a country too expensive to live in, too limited to grow in, and too uncertain to stay in. Stick with this video, because what's happening in New Zealand may be a preview of tomorrow's reality. To understand today's dysfunction, we must go back to 1984, the dawn of New Zealand's most radical economic transformation. Sweeping reforms known as Rogernomics were introduced. Within just 5 years, New Zealand dismantled many pillars of its post-war welfare state. The impact was immediate. Inflation fell, but so did factories, jobs, and patients. Critics called it economic shock therapy. Supporters praised it as modernization. But either way, the social contract was broken. Over time, government spending as a share of GDP fell from 42% in the 1980s to 34% by 2000, according to Treasury data. But the promised surge in private sector investment never fully materialized. Productivity slid below the OECD average and stayed there. And while the reforms made the economy more open and competitive, they also deepened inequality, hollowed out industrial capacity, and set the stage for the crises we face today. A public sector starved of investment, and a workforce locked out of the prosperity it helped build. That context matters, but it's not the whole story. The present is built on two pillars. New Zealand's economy rests on two aging pillars: tourism and agriculture. Tourism alone accounted for 5% of GDP pre-pandemic and roughly employed 1 in 9 New Zealanders. But this reliance came at a price. When the borders shut in 2020, GDP shrank 2.1%. Businesses folded. Workers were laid off en masse. Though tourist numbers have bounced back to 84% of pre-COVID levels, the recovery remains fragile. The government's recent decision to triple the visitor tax from 35 New Zealand dollars to 100 New Zealand dollars may further dampen demand. International visitor numbers stood at 2.8 million in the year ending March 2024, still below the 3.9 million peak in 2019. Agriculture contributes another 5% of GDP and makes up over 65% of merchandise exports. Key products include dairy, meat, and wine. Fonterra alone exports to more than 130 countries and contributes about 3% of the national GDP. Yet, this critical sector is heavily reliant on migrant labor. Before the pandemic, approximately 20% of agricultural workers were migrants. Border closures in 2020 and 2021 led to major labor shortages, with reports of kiwi fruit, apple, and grape crops left unharvested, resulting in estimated industry losses exceeding 100 million New Zealand dollars in a single season. New environmental policies further complicate matters. As part of the Zero Carbon Act, the government has mandated a 10% reduction in biogenic methane emissions by 2030 and up to 47% by 2050. While essential for climate goals, these targets force farmers to adopt new practices and technologies, including methane-reducing feed supplements and anaerobic digesters, investments not all can afford. This twin dependency on tourism and agriculture, both highly vulnerable to external shocks and structural pressures, creates an economic fragility. When tourists vanish or migrant labor dries up, the entire structure trembles. The illusion of a diversified modern economy fades. Beneath the surface, New Zealand remains dangerously over-reliant on weather, seasons, and international goodwill. A small, open economy can prosper until it meets rising costs and falling capacity. Now, let's zoom out. If pay won't move, productivity won't either. In New Zealand, the cost of living has surged. To tame inflation, which peaked at over 7.3% in mid-2022, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand hiked rates aggressively, but this hit businesses hard. Loans became more expensive, expansion slowed, job creation dried up. The effects were uneven. While high-income earners saw modest gains, low- and middle-income households bore the brunt. Food prices surged 8.9% year-on-year as of early 2024, and rent increases continued unabated. According to the OECD, New Zealand has a modest wage-to-GDP ratios among developed economies, but here's the real kicker. Even as wages stagnated, profits soared. Employers retained profit margins while employees' purchasing power eroded. Meanwhile, productivity remains a chronic issue. New Zealanders work more hours per week than the OECD average, but produce 15% less output per hour. Yet, even with more effort, real wages do not rise. So, where does that leave workers? Well, behind. According to Stats NZ, nearly 40% of full-time workers earn less than the median wage of 66,196 New Zealand dollars. And for renters, nearly half spend over 30% of their income just on housing. But that's just the middle. At the top, New Zealand's top 1% of earners now take home over 8% of all taxable income, up from just 4% in the early 2000s. And at the bottom 50% of households own just 2% of the country's net wealth, according to the Reserve Bank's 2023 Household Wealth Report. For younger generations, the outlook is especially bleak. A graduate entering the workforce in 2025 faces a median starting salary of 56,000 New Zealand dollars, which, adjusted for inflation, is worth 8% less than in 2010. This isn't just a gap, it's a chasm widened by policies that suppress wage bargaining, like the Employment Contracts Act, which broke collective unions in the 1990s, and by the rise of precarious work, gig jobs, casual contracts, zero-hour employment. In 2023, over 420,000 New Zealanders, or 17% of the workforce, were in non-standard employment. These jobs often pay less, offer no job security, and provide little to no benefits. This isn't just wage stagnation, it's the unraveling of a middle class. A generation raised on the promise of progress finds itself earning less in real terms than their parents. The economic ladder hasn't just broken, it's been quietly dismantled. Let's talk about housing, because if there's one thing that defines the absurdity of life in New Zealand today, it's this. Housing isn't just expensive, it's a crisis that has quietly become one of the worst in the developed world. Between 2000 and 2021, New Zealand's house prices rose by a staggering 256% after adjusting for inflation. That's more than double the increase in the United States. Why so high? Because housing in New Zealand isn't treated as shelter, it's treated as an investment vehicle. With no capital gains tax, generous tax offsets for landlords, and limited regulation, speculation became the norm. By 2022, over 40% of all residential property purchases were made by investors, not homeowners. Meanwhile, supply collapsed under the weight of bureaucracy and underinvestment. Building consent approvals fell 28% in 2023, High interest rates and material shortages have stalled development. Strict zoning laws in urban areas like Auckland and Wellington stifled density. Local councils lacked the funds to build new infrastructure. Construction costs surged by 30% between 2019 and 2023. The result? A chronic shortfall in housing supply, while demand exploded. And who pays the price? Ordinary renters, first-time buyers, families locked out of ownership. In 2023, 46% of renters paid more than 30% of their income on rent, the international benchmark for housing stress. The median house price hit $780,000, while the median income was under $70,000. That's a price-to-income ratio of over 11 to 1, among the highest in the world. For low-income families, the situation is even worse. Over 2.3% of the entire population lives in severe housing deprivation. That's more than 110,000 people sleeping in cars, motels, garages, and emergency shelters. Emergency housing now costs the government over 4 billion New Zealand dollars annually, up from just 1.6 billion in 2017. The government's Kiwi Build scheme, once aimed at building 100,000 affordable homes, has fallen short. Less than 2,000 homes were completed by mid-2024, far below its original goal. Housing has become a closed system, unaffordable to enter, impossible to escape. A nation once defined by its quarter-acre dream is now grappling with overcrowding, skyrocketing rents, and a shrinking sense of security. Housing isn't just an economic issue, it's existential. Without secure shelter, the social contract frays. And for many Kiwis, the dream of owning a home in their own country now feels completely out of reach. When shelter eats your pay, services eat your time, New Zealand's infrastructure is aging and inadequate. Let's start with transport. Auckland's transport system ranks among the most congested in the developed world. In 2023, Waka Kotahi, the National Transport Agency, reported a $1.5 billion funding shortfall in the National Land Transport Program. Major roading projects, like Auckland's light rail, are billions over budget and years behind schedule. Then there's water infrastructure. Water systems in many towns are outdated and prone to contamination. In 2022, 15% of wastewater treatment plants were operating with expired consents, meaning they could be discharging untreated or poorly treated waste into rivers and oceans. The Three Waters reform, designed to centralize drinking, storm, and wastewater management, has faced resistance and delays. Meanwhile, aging pipes in Wellington burst weekly, leaking millions of liters of water and causing service interruptions for thousands. Meanwhile, in healthcare, the picture is just as grim. Waitlists for elective surgeries exceed 430,000 people. Emergency departments across the country have reported routinely breaching safety thresholds. Over 25% of hospital buildings are rated as being in poor or very poor condition. In 2023, Te Watu Ora, Health NZ, faced an operating shortfall of over $1 billion, triggering a wave of funding freezes, hiring cuts, and clinical service delays. In education, the rot runs deep. A 2022 Ministry of Education audit found that 1 in 5 schools have buildings deemed poor or unfit for purpose. Leaking roofs, black mold, asbestos. Not rare exceptions, but growing norms. Across every sector, roads, hospitals, schools, the pattern is the same: chronic underinvestment, delayed maintenance, and rising costs. New Zealand's infrastructure is stuck in a loop of short-term fixes, with long-term needs ignored. And without urgent, coordinated investment, this infrastructure decay will choke economic growth, deepen regional inequality, and accelerate the exodus already underway. New Zealand isn't losing a few people here and there, it's losing a generation. In the last 12 months, net departures hit records. Who's leaving? The people who build, care, and code are choosing Australia, the UK, and increasingly Canada. This moves us on to the question of why they are leaving. Let's break it down. Talented workers seeking opportunities in high-growth sectors like tech, science, and advanced manufacturing often find better prospects abroad. Healthcare and education are particularly affected. Over 30% of doctors trained in New Zealand now work overseas. In 2024, a record 800 teachers moved to Australia for higher salaries and improved working conditions. New Zealand spends over 14 billion New Zealand dollars annually on education, yet struggles to retain graduates. Many students finish university with debt averaging 23,000 New Zealand dollars, only to face low wages and high living costs. Leaving becomes not just desirable, but rational. Meanwhile, efforts to attract skilled migrants have faltered. Visa processing delays, rising costs, and inconsistent immigration policy deter international talent. New Zealand's share of global skilled migrants has declined steadily since 2017. This isn't just a numbers game, it's a human capital crisis. The country educates its best and brightest only to export them for free. The result is a vacuum, a loss of innovation, leadership, and energy. And unlike previous waves, many of today's immigrants have no plans to return. New Zealand was once sold to the world as a utopia in the Pacific. Clean air, pristine land, a fair, peaceful society, and balanced beauty with pragmatism. In global rankings, it was often near the top. But today, that vision is cracking. A housing crisis with no end. A labor force hollowed out. A generation priced out of its own future. This is not a failure of individuals. It's the cumulative result of policy choices, of neglected infrastructure, of an economy structured to reward assets over labor, of a belief that the market will solve everything, while public services quietly rot. This isn't just a cost of living crisis, it's a meaning crisis. But absurdity doesn't need to be destiny. New Zealand can change course. A country isn't just its GDP, it's what it offers its people, today and tomorrow. New Zealand still has time, but that window is closing. Because if paradise becomes unaffordable, if fairness becomes unreachable, if home becomes unlivable, then even paradise can become absurd.